BookTube, we're back. Let's go over my top books from each month of 2024. Before we get into the books, 2024 has been an amazing year for reading, at least for me, but I can tell from you all there too as well by the many different comments, by your videos that you post, both on the tube and TikTok. Like I said, for me, it's been absolutely amazing. I had a goal of reading 60 books this year, but I'm not going to make that goal. So far, I've read 46 books this year. This is December of me recording this. I am not going to make it to 60. And that is okay because these were some high quality books that I read this year. Maybe with an average rating of 4 stars or above. Like this year was absolutely amazing. And I know a lot of you got some recommendations from me there. This is very painstaking to do each and every month and rank the top books from there. I guess it can be even more painstaking to do the top books from the entire year too as well, if I can get them down to 10. But we'll do that at some point. Before I go on, what are your top books from each month, right? So each month of the year, I'm curious about that. We're going to go through mine. This is going to be a painstaking process because there were so many great books there, but let's dive into it. January. So before I go into January, I ended the year last year reading some absolutely incredible books, some of my favorite books of all time. The Sword of Kaigen, and then I followed up with The Will of the Many. And I was on a high, and I want to continue this year on a high. And I had this series on my list for a while. So it was Red Rising, Red Rising, and then it was Golden Sun, then it was Morning Star. So I actually started the year with that, as well as reading the 5th season, which is in the Broken Earth trilogy. Those were some very, very amazing books. My top book out of that cream of the crop was definitely Morning Star. If you're not familiar with Red Rising is a sci-fi space opera that follows the main character, Darrow, as he comes from lesser beginnings and infiltrates, kind of the higher order of, this universe there. And when I read Red Rising itself, I thought I started the year with like a low-key dud. Again, I know a lot of people love the first Red Rising book. For me, it was just okay. And I think that was because I came from that high of The Will of the Many, came from that high of The Sword of Kaigen. And I wanted, something that's to match that. But a lot of you all, whether you follow me here, whether you follow me on TikTok, you all was like, Smitty, you got to keep the series going. I read Golden Sun and I was locked in. Golden Sun was absolutely amazing. But Morning Star to me was the best book out of that group there, and it was my favorite read of January there too as well. The 5th season was absolutely amazing. The Broken Earth trilogy is absolutely amazing, but Morning Star for January, just chef's kiss. And then we get into February. So February was also a great month for me too as well. I actually read 3 books in February, but 3 pretty good books. Well, 2 pretty good books, and 1 that was just okay. So I read The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Allenton because I was chasing that high from The Will of the Many. It was okay, but I think I need to go back to reading The Shadow of What Was Lost or, that series just because, again, I was entering into that thinking The Will of the Many vibes. And, that's a user error. That's on me for thinking that. I'm sure every author, when it comes to different series, especially, when you think about Brandon Sanderson, you think about John Gwynne, you think about all these other authors out there have multiple series across different, places. They don't always match up to be the same. And I went into Shadow Was Lost, thinking it was going to Will of Many. That wasn't what it is there. But I did read the Burning series in this. And my favorite book from this month of February was The Rage of Dragons. So I read The Rage of Dragons and The Fires of Vengeance, but The Rage of Dragons was my favorite book from February, and a book that just keeps on giving for me because I still think back to this story, still think back to these characters, and man, that book just really took off for me. So if you're not familiar with The Rage of Dragons, I have this thing where you follow characters from lesser beginnings, but this character, Tao, he is not given the best hand that he can be dealt, and the first few pages of his story is filled with nothing but drama and a lot of trauma. And somehow, some way, he rises above it and just goes absolutely insane on the Crazy Revenge tour in this African-inspired fantasy that you'll ever kind of read. Great magical system, great setting, heartbreaking moments. The Burning series itself, I highly recommend. The Fires of Vengeance, I really enjoyed too as well. I really like The Rage of Dragons more, but The Fires of Vengeance, I enjoyed too as well. But February was a great month for me there too. Really, really enjoyed February. March is where we run into, like, when you're just reading banger after banger after banger after banger. I did start the month with the Poppy War, and I actually listened to the Poppy War to start off with. And I think I did myself a disservice because I was listening and I was doing a lot of different things instead of actually locking into the audiobook. So I didn't rate it as high as maybe I would have if I read it the first time. So I'm going to go back and actually read that. But all the other books that I read this month was crazy. Crazy. So I read The Reformatory. I read Blood Over Brighthaven. I read Tressler Emerald Sea. And I read The Way of Kings. And it's hard. This one was hard because I know the answer in my mind, but thinking back now, like Blood Over Brighthaven, just reading that when it was self-published, that was a moment. And that was the first time I kind of hosted the book club. And that book was rated so high, and I rate it so high, and I hope everybody gets the chance to read Blood Over Brighthaven. I talked about it many times on this, YouTube channel. Emma Wong is she's just the best when it comes to that writing. She's 2 for 2 for me, and there's some of her new books from there. The Reformatory was such a great, heartbreaking story too, as well. And then Tress, I read Tress right before The Way of Kings because I kind of want to get back into Brandon Sanderson's writing, knowing, how he writes. But the book that is my favorite book from the month of March has to be The Way of Kings. The Way of Kings. So for all your backstory out there, I actually DNF'd The Way of Kings the first time I read it, way back, I think it was like 2020. I'm sure some of you know the story. I just wanted a book to read to get my mind off of things, but I was more worried about the events that were happening globally instead of like worrying about, the book that I was reading there. So I DNF'd it for the first time, but in 2024, this was like a 5.5 out of 5. Like, The Way of Kings, for me, set up like my love even more for Brandon Sanderson's writing. It's the first book in the Stormlight Archive. Again, it's hard to explain it without going too far into spoilers. Just know it's high epic fantasy, and I'm sure everybody now is reading the Stormlight Archive as recording this video when In Truth is out, and I'm currently reading When in Truth as well. But man, like, this one just truly amazing. So for March, it was definitely The Way of Kings. April was another banger of a month too as well. So I read A Song for the Wild Built, which was my lowest rated book of the month. I think I gave that a 3-star. I think this was probably just wrong place, wrong time type of ordeal for me. I also read Changing All-Stars, which was so good. So good. So good. I already did a video on going through that book there, but Changing All-Stars was so good. I also read Vicious with my book club. Another great story too as well. And I also read Dune because I wanted to watch the movie in that month too as well, in the month of April. So I read Dune, then I watched the movie. I prefer the movie over the book, but again, it's okay there. And then this is where we start running into some great things. And I have like my books here because this is a month that I read a lot. So I read Words of Radiance in this month. Words of Radiance is obviously, as you all know, my favorite book of all time. My favorite book from this year. My favorite brand is my favorite book just in general. 6 stars. Words of Radiance is just absolutely incredible. It's the second book in the Stormlight Archive, and it's just nothing just can compare to it. Like that I literally remember that month being like, I'm like, there's no month that's gonna top this month. Like, this book here just like surpassed every book that I've read, and insane. And then after that, I obviously read the novella Edge Dancer because it's the follow-up to Words of Radiance, or it's in that order from there too as well. But Words of Radiance for April is just like insane. All right, and then for May, we had a couple other great books too as well. We had Black Shield Maiden by Willow Smith. We had Oathbringer. We had Artificial Wisdom. And we had The Spirit Cuts Through Water. Great lineup there. It was a battle between Oathbringer and Artificial Wisdom. I'm going to give it to actually the Artificial Wisdom. And here's why. Oathbringer, absolutely amazing. In the top of the top. I just had an issue with the first half of Oathbringer. So for that month, I remembered to myself that I couldn't give that month to Oathbringer just because of the pacing issues in the beginning. If the last half of the book was the entire book, it'd probably be better than Words of Radiance. It's just that in Oathbringer in the beginning, that's what it was. Artificial Wisdom, though? Artificial Wisdom, absolutely perfect for me. And I'm so glad that, I actually got the chance to read this. In this one, you follow a journalist as he has to deal with climate change. The year is like 2050 or anything like that. So he has to deal with, climate change. He has to deal with, AI taking over the world. And what I mean by that is there is a election as between a AI candidate and just a regular person. And I'm sure you all can see think how that goes. And that story was just so amazing. And again, I know there's a lot of artificial intelligence books that are out there. This one I think does it really well because it doesn't paint the it doesn't like do a job of like, hey, artificial intelligence is bad. It just makes you question, and it makes you question. And I love books that make you question instead of kind of convict. And amazing story. So Artificial Wisdom for May won out. June. So June, I've only read 3 books, but those 3 books really set up the rest of this year. So it was Yumi the Nightmare Painter, it was Empire of Silence, which is the first book in the Sun Eater series, and is Howling Dark, was the second book of the Sun Eater series. So Empire of Silence, good book. I really enjoyed the introduction there. But again, I think it was better than Red Rising in terms of the first book in the Red Rising series. But however, it still wasn't like top of the top in terms of like a 5-star read for me. But it gave me enough to continue the series. I got to Howling Dark though. Before I go to Howling Dark, Give Me a Nightmare Painter, one of my favorite Brandon Sanderson standalones for sure. Like, that story, truly amazing. It's his take of romantasy, but Howling Dark, the second book in the Sun Eater series, won June for sure. So, Sun Eater series in general. So, you follow Hadrian Marlowe, who is really trying to understand his purpose throughout the entire universe. This is a space opera that takes place across many different planets, all across the universe. And, in the first book, he's really trying to figure it out. He goes to different planets to try to figure it out. And Howling Dark, though, it goes insane as they now know who the enemy is. And as he now is not the Hadrian of old, he's a Hadrian of new. This is first-person point of view storytelling, and Howling Dark is where Christopher Ruocchio really hits his stride to me. And that month, it just won out for me, and is one of my favorite reads of this year. I remember when I got to the end of that book, jaw was on the floor. And it's tough for me. I know I'm rating these books, whatever. It's tough for me to be like flabbergasted. And in Howling Dark, it was like, I need to continue the series like tomorrow. July. So July was another month that was filled with a plethora of books. I was all over the place. So in July, I read Dawnshard, which is the novella after Oathbringer. I also read Gideon the Ninth. I also read Jade City, which was so damn good. And then I read parts of The Name of the Wind. This is my first book that I DNF'd this year, The Name of the Wind. I DNF'd it at 512. Again, I understand people's love for The Name of the Wind. For me, it just didn't do it. Like I got as far in the book as I could go, and then I just said, I just can't keep this going. And that's okay. Like, I know people love it, and I'm not going to bash the book. Just for me at that time, I'm like, ooh, I couldn't do it. But then I get to Demon in White. And another 6 out of 5-star book. Demon in White is the follow-up to, obviously, Howling Dark, the follow-up to Empire of Silence. Demon in White, for me, solidified the Sun Eater series as one of the best sci-fi series of all time. It's just, I know Christopher Ruocchio said that book should have been more than one book. I actually enjoyed it in one book. Like, it was just perfection. Everyone, perfection. If you haven't read the Sun Eater series yet, they're gonna keep popping up in this talk here. But the writing was just insane. Like, when an author, like, after different books just keep getting better and better and better. Demon in White just. So for that month, for July, Demon in White was the one. August. So August, I actually did a good amount of traveling in the month of August. I went back home to Maryland, as well as got a chance to travel to Japan. So I only got a chance to read 3 books in the month of August. I read The Shadow of the Gods, which is the introduction to Bloodsworn saga, which I thought that book was an incredible introduction. I also read Kingdoms of Death and Rhythm of War. So it's really a battle between Kingdoms of Death and Rhythm of War. I read Rhythm of War on the way to Japan, and I read Kingdoms of Death on the way back from Japan. Out of both of those, because Shadow of the God was great, but we'll go forward into Bloodsworn later on. Between Kingdoms of Death and Rhythm of War. Now we're doing this live right now, so I have actually thinking about this right now. I think I'm gonna give it to Kingdoms of Death, just because because both of those books are emotional, by the way, and I do not recommend reading those back to back from each other. But Kingdoms of Death, if you watch the Avengers, what was it, Endgame? Yeah, if you watch Avengers Endgame, and if you went to a movie theater for the first time watching Avengers Endgame, like, all the Marvel fans did, and that loss after loss after loss after loss. Oh, not Endgame, sorry, not Endgame. Infinity War, my bad. Infinity War. We're going to keep this in there. Who cares if I mess up? Infinity War, because Infinity War was first and then came Endgame. And Infinity War, and you watched that movie in the theater for the first time and you sat there with everyone and it was just loss after loss after loss after loss, and not knowing, the story and not knowing how the story would end. That is how I felt in the airport reading and listening to Kingdoms of Death. Like, we have this thing where you obviously get to the airport and you go and check to see if your gate is there. Your gate is there. Yes, your gate is there. But I always have this thing where I want to make sure my gate is actually there. So I will walk to my gate, see it, and then I'll go and get food and do whatever like that. I was on my way to do that. I was listening at the time, locked in, and I was like, wait a minute, I gotta sit down. Forget the gate. Forget the gate. This was in Kingdoms of Death. Forget the gate. Like, I'm just gonna sit here and just be stunned. Be stunned. Like, I was already coming back from Japan, which is one of the greatest countries of all time, into the United States, where everybody was already like mean mugging me. And I just, like, when I tell you, like, tears, like, you don't know you have an attachment to characters until, like, that moment comes up. And you're like, wait a minute, no, like, not this person, not that person. Kingdoms of Death did that for me in an airport, coming back from one of the greatest countries in the world. So I have to give it to Kingdoms of Death. Rhythm of War was great, but Kingdoms of Death, favorite read of August. So September was a great month too as well. We had some great reads. We had Legendborn, we had Dark Matter, we had Scythe. Truly amazing reads. I will say this though. Dark Matter was a read just because I wanted to watch a TV show as well. So the TV show's on Apple TV. And between Legendborn and Scythe, those were two YAs. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you take anything from me in this video, in my content, do not let the YA designation deter you from reading some great books. Legendborn, fire book. Scythe 2 as well, fire book. But my top book from that month had to have been The Hunger of the Gods. I told you we're going to come back to Bloodsworn. The Hunger of the Gods. Like, The Shadow of the Gods, great story, and it's a Norse-inspired fantasy. You follow different points of view as they kind of race towards, these gods and like these mythical worlds and things like that. I can't talk about it without going too far into spoilers. So, Shadow of the Gods was a great introduction to it, and I'm like, okay, I see the series going. Let's see if it goes there. In The Hunger of the Gods, John Gwynne had the nerve to add even more points of view, and it was absolutely insane. But that ending, though. That ending was just one of the best endings. One of the best endings that you'll ever read. And it's so funny because that series, we actually, as a book club, we actually, like to pick different books, but like this is the first series that we actually ran all the way through, right? So obviously, Shadow of the Gods, next month was Hunger of the Gods, and then obviously Fear of the Gods didn't come out till later on in the next month. So we actually picked it up, the following month there too as well. So just top tier reading for that month, but Hunger of the Gods won for sure. All right, October. So now I'm thinking back to October. October was just a fire month for me, but it didn't turn out how I wanted it to turn out. And let me explain why. So I wanted to get into horror. I wanted to get into spooky season. So I had The Shining. I think I had like Lost Gods. I think I had like Dark Tower on my TBR list. And this is why you don't have to stick to your TBR list, because something's going to come along sometimes and you want to be as fluid as possible. And so I did read The Shining because we read it with the book club, which was 100% totally fire. But there were people who were telling me, there's some people telling me, oh, you can skip Mistborn Era 2. And some people telling me, oh, you shouldn't skip Mistborn Era 2. I chose not to skip Mistborn Era 2, but I think I chose in the wrong month because I just had the Alloy of Law on my TBR list, not even thinking I was going to read the rest of the series. I read the Alloy of Law, I read Shadows of Self, I read Bands of Mourning, and I read Secret History all in that month. I didn't read any other books. And out of that, The Bands of Mourning, of course, is my top read of October. And I apologize because I wanted to get more into horror. I wanted to read that. I wanted to be a person of my word, but the series just came along and just like derailed all of that there. So first off, Mistborn Era 2, it's hundreds, I think it's like 300 years past Mistborn Era 1. You follow two characters, Wax and Wayne. They have the same magical system. It's in the same location schedule, but now it's further down the road. So there's more technology advances. And it has a little Western vibe to it, which I can understand from people saying like, hey, like you may not like it because it's like a little Western. I thoroughly enjoyed it so much that it derailed my entire month. And The Bands of Mourning is the third book in the second Mistborn era, and a lot of Cosmere connections in there. Characters are hitting their stride. So from book one, Steris is a character who in book 3 is like totally different. Like now she has a main role, and I love how Brandon Sanderson does that with his characters. Like, yeah, in the first book, they can be mentioned like not like nonchalant, and then all of a sudden now they have a major role. I love the way he does that, and in this one, he does it so amazing. So The Bands of Mourning won out for October for sure. And then November. So November, another crazy month. I had Dungeon Crawler Carl, I had The Fear of the Gods, I had The Sunlit Man, and I had The Lost Meadow. So The Sunlit Man was okay. Like, I thought it was okay. It's probably not my favorite Brandon Sanderson book there. The Fear of the Gods, amazing, by the way, amazing. But it was really between Dungeon Crawler Carl and The Lost Meadow. And I'm going to give it to Dungeon Crawler Carl. November, Dungeon Crawler Carl. So if you've been along this journey, if you got this far, you can tell I've been reading some very emotional, very crazy books there. And people recommended Dungeon Crawler Carl because it's a nice break from all that. And let me tell you, whoever recommended me Dungeon Crawler Carl, I hope all your wishes come true. I hope you get the best parking spot of all time. Every time you go to Target, Walmart, wherever you shop, like, I hope you get the best parking spot. Because Dungeon Crawler Carl caught me completely off guard. So, without going too far into spoilers, Dungeon Crawler Carl is a lit RPG, so a literature role-playing game. And we're on planet Earth, and all of a sudden people step outside and all the buildings are just gone from the perspective there. And an alien invades the world to kind of collect their debt on the Earth. So all these people kind of have to go into these dungeons, and they have to compete for these live games that is broadcasted across the universe. Then you follow the character Carl, who, again, he's a part of this, and you follow his, I wouldn't say point of view because it's not first person point of view, but you follow him as he kind of goes through there. And he has an unlikely companion who he rides with too as well. And it is some of the funniest stuff that you'll ever read. Like, when I tell you I was on the floor laughing, tears in my eyes at some of the stuff that has been said in this book. I want you all to experience it. The Lost Meadow was so amazing too, but Dungeon Crawler Carl won out for me just because, like, it was something so new to me that while The Lost Meadow is something that I've known, and it was probably one of the most emotional Brandon Sanderson books I ever read, like an actual really like Dog Waterfalls came down. Dungeon Crawler Carl was just so new to me. I got to give it to Dungeon Crawler Carl for November for sure. And we're in December, and I'm normally not in the predicting business, but for this one, I'm going to say that it's going to be Wind and Truth. I'm currently reading Wind and Truth right now. I'm close to halfway done, and it's going to win December. But not only just because like I think it's going to be great, also because it's like 1,400 pages long, and it's going to take up most of December. And I hope I get to other books from there, but I'll come back and say if it's not the best, but so far right now, December is going to be Wind and Truth. But yeah. All right, so that was my 12-month journey this year in terms of my top books from each month this year, each month of 2024. What are your top books from 2024 for each month? I'm very curious. We'll come back here and we'll do top books in general to rank them. But yeah, like those some great stories. This year has been totally amazing. 2025, we're gonna do it big too as well. As always, everyone, happy reading.